The cargo bay doors of Frontier Station 7 groaned open, letting in a blast of recycled air that smelled like fuel and desperation. Velshera's claws scraped against the metal grating as she dragged herself forward, her mother's enormous body weighing her down with every step. Castell had once been a sight to behold, a dragon whose albino scales shimmered like moonlight on water. Now those same scales were dull, cracked in places, and the cybernetic wing attached to her left side sparked and stuttered with a sound that made Velshera's heart clench. They'd been walking for 3 hours. 3 hours through the maze of corridors that made up the lower levels of the station, where the lighting was dim and the air was thick with the smell of machinery and unwashed bodies. Castell could barely breathe, each exhale coming out as a ragged wheeze that echoed off the walls. The cybernetic wing that was supposed to let her fly, that was supposed to give her the freedom her people valued above all else, was killing her instead. The servos ground against each other with a horrible metallic screech, and every few minutes, sparks would fly from the connection point where metal met flesh. Velshera had tried everything. She'd gone to the Talgren mechanics first, the ones with their precise tools and their reputation for perfection. They'd taken one look at Castell's wing and shaken their heads. Too many incompatible systems, they said. Too much jury-rigging from too many different species. They couldn't guarantee anything, and they certainly wouldn't risk their reputation on a mess like this. The cost they quoted was more than Velshera would earn in 5 years. Next came the Volian technicians, who were supposed to be experts in cybernetic integration. They'd been even worse. One of them had actually laughed, a clicking sound that made Velshera's spines rise in anger. A dragon with human technology? Who had done such sloppy work? They wouldn't touch it. Liability issues, they claimed. If something went wrong during the procedure, if Castell died on their table, the Scaled Dominion would hold them responsible. Better to let someone else take that risk. The third shop hadn't even let them through the door. The owner had seen Castell's massive form through the window and immediately locked up, muttering something about safety regulations and proper appointments. Velshera had wanted to tear the door off its hinges, but Castell had stopped her with a weak gesture of her good wing. Violence wouldn't help. It never did. Now they were here, at the very last option on Velshera's list. A human repair shop tucked away in the darkest corner of the station's industrial sector. The sign above the door was flickering, half the letters burned out so it just read OM's Reply. The window was grimy, covered in a film of oil and dust that made it impossible to see inside clearly. Through the haze, Velshera could make out shelves piled high with parts, tools hanging from hooks on the walls, and what looked like 3 different engines in various states of disassembly on the floor. Humans? The galaxy's favorite joke. Every species had their stories about human incompetence, about their primitive understanding of technology, about how they'd barely figured out faster-than-light travel when the rest of the galaxy had been using it for millennia. They were considered tinkerers at best, dangerous amateurs at worst. Their ships were held together with what other species called optimistic engineering, and what humans called good enough. They had a reputation for fixing things in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did, usually involving excessive amounts of welding and a casual disregard for manufacturer specifications. But Velshera was out of options. Her savings were nearly gone, spent on failed consultations and transport fees. Castell was fading, her breathing getting worse with each passing hour. The infection where the cybernetic wing connected to her body was spreading, visible as angry red lines creeping across her white scales. If they didn't do something soon, if they didn't find someone willing to help, Castell would die. And Velshera would be alone in a galaxy that had never wanted either of them in the first place. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, a small bell jingling above their heads. The smell hit her immediately. Oil, solder, something burning, and underneath it all, the strange scent of coffee that humans seemed to consume in alarming quantities. The shop was cramped, every surface covered in projects and parts. A radio in the corner played music she didn't recognize, something with guitars and a steady beat. And there, bent over a workbench with a welding torch in hand, was a human. He was older, maybe 50 or 60 by human standards, with gray streaking through his dark hair and oil stains on his shirt. He didn't look up at the sound of the bell, too focused on whatever he was working on. Sparks flew from his torch, and he was humming along to the music, completely oblivious to the fact that a dragon had just entered his shop. Velshera cleared her throat. The human still didn't look up. She tried again, louder this time, and finally he switched off the torch and turned around. His eyes widened slightly when he saw them, taking in Castell's massive form slumped against the wall, the sparking wing, the obvious pain in the old dragon's face. But he didn't run. He didn't refuse them. He just set down his torch, grabbed a rag, and wiped his hands clean. Well, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. Tom walked around Castell slowly, his boots making soft squeaking sounds on the oil-stained floor. He didn't flinch when the dragon's golden eyes tracked his movement, didn't hesitate when he reached out to touch the damaged cybernetic wing. His calloused fingers traced the connection points, the mismatched bolts, the tangled mess of wiring that looked like 5 different mechanics had each added their own patch without bothering to check what the previous one had done. Velshera watched him carefully, her body tense and ready to strike if this human did anything to hurt her mother. But Tom's touch was gentle, almost reverent. He pressed carefully on a panel near the wing joint, and Castell let out a small whimper of pain. Tom immediately pulled his hand back. "Sorry about that," he muttered, making a note on a data pad he pulled from his pocket. "I know that hurts. We'll get you fixed up, don't worry." Velshera blinked. In all the shops they'd visited today, not one mechanic had apologized to her mother. Not one had spoken directly to Castell, treating her like a person instead of just a broken machine that happened to be alive. They'd all talked over her, around her, about her, but never to her. Tom continued his examination, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. He pulled out a scanner and ran it over the wing assembly, shaking his head at whatever the readout showed him. After a few minutes, he straightened up and looked at Castell with an expression that Velshera couldn't quite read. "Okay, here's the situation," Tom said, addressing the dragon directly. "You've got Talgren servos connected to Volian power cells, with Corinthian stabilizers that were never designed to work with either of those systems. And someone, at some point, tried to patch it all together with Hirati connectors, which are corroding because they're not rated for the voltage you're running through them. The whole thing is a disaster." Castell closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her scaled cheek. She knew. She'd known for years that her wing was a patchwork nightmare. Every mechanic she'd visited over the decades had added their fix, taken their payment, and sent her on her way. None of them had cared about the long-term consequences. None of them had cared about her. "But here's the good news," Tom continued, and Castell's eyes opened again. "I can fix it. It's gonna take some time, and it's gonna require basically rebuilding the whole assembly from scratch, but I can fix it. And more importantly, I can make it so you won't have to keep coming back for repairs every few months. We'll do it right this time." Velshera felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight and painful for days. "How much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She already knew the answer would be more than she could afford. It always was. Tom scratched his chin, looking thoughtful. "Parts are gonna run me about 300 credits. Call it 350 to cover my time. You can pay me when we're done, after you've seen that everything works." The number was so low that Velshera thought she'd misheard him. 350 credits? For a complete rebuild. "That's what I said, isn't it?" Tom replied, already moving toward the back of his shop. "Now, before we start surgery, let's make your mom comfortable. She's been hurting for a long time, and that stops right now." He disappeared through a doorway and came back a moment later with an armful of thermal blankets. Working with surprising efficiency for someone who looked like he'd never seen a dragon before, Tom arranged the blankets into a makeshift bed near his largest workbench. He adjusted the shop's environmental controls, raising the temperature and humidity to levels that were more comfortable for draconic physiology. Velshera hadn't even realized she'd been cold until the warmth started seeping into her scales. "Help me get her over here," Tom said, and together they guided Castell to the blankets. The old dragon settled down with a sigh of relief, finally able to rest without the pressure of standing on her damaged wing. But Tom still wasn't done. He went to a small kitchen area in the back and returned with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to Velshera. It smelled sweet and spicy, nothing like the bitter drink she was used to. "Hot chocolate," Tom explained. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said you can't do good work on an empty stomach or a cold heart." He held the second mug carefully and helped Castell take small sips, supporting her head with his other hand. Velshera stared at him in confusion. This made no sense. Humans were supposed to be selfish, weren't they? They were supposed to be the species that cared only about profit and advancement. That's what every other species said about them. But here was this human, giving them comfort and kindness when every so-called advanced species in the galaxy had turned them away. Tom must have seen the confusion on her face because he smiled. "You're wondering why I'm being nice, aren't you?" Velshera nodded slowly. "My grandmother taught me something when I was learning this trade," Tom said, settling onto a stool and pulling his data pad back out. "She said that before you fix the machine, you need to understand who needs it fixed. Because you're not just repairing metal and circuits. You're repairing someone's life, someone's freedom, someone's ability to be who they're meant to be. He gestured at Castell with his mug. Your mom there, she's supposed to fly. That's what dragons do, right? And some combination of bad luck and worse mechanics has taken that away from her. So yeah, I'm gonna fix the wing. But first, I'm gonna make sure she knows that she matters. That her pain matters. That she's not just another job to me. Tom took a long drink of his hot chocolate and opened up a design program on his datapad. Now, let's figure out how to get your Mema back in the sky where she belongs. This is gonna take a couple days, so get comfortable. You're both staying here where I can keep an eye on things. Velshera felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt hope. And as Tom started sketching out designs, humming along to his strange human music, occasionally asking Castell questions about her comfort and preferences, Velshera realized something else too. Maybe the galaxy had been wrong about humans. Maybe being advanced wasn't about having the best technology or the most precise tools. Maybe it was about remembering that behind every broken machine was someone who deserved to be whole again. The first 24 hours blurred together in a haze of sparks and the smell of heated metal. Tom worked through the night, pausing only to check on Castell's vital signs and make sure she was comfortable. Velshera tried to stay awake with him, but exhaustion eventually claimed her around 3 in the morning. She woke up 6 hours later to find a blanket draped over her shoulders and Tom still at work, a fresh cup of coffee steaming on his workbench. You didn't sleep at all? Velshera asked, her voice rough from the dry air. Tom glanced over his shoulder, his eyes red-rimmed but focused. I'll sleep when the critical part is done. Right now I'm removing all the incompatible systems. It's like untangling a knot, you know? You have to be patient, work slowly, or you'll make it worse. He was using tools Velshera had never seen before, some of them looking handmade, modified for purposes she could only guess at. Where the Talgren mechanics had relied on precision scanners and computer-guided instruments, Tom used his hands and his instincts. He'd touch a connection point, feel the heat or the vibration, and somehow know exactly what was wrong with it. Around midday, the shop door opened with its familiar jingle. Velshera's head snapped up, her body tensing defensively. But Tom didn't even look away from his work. Hey Rita, he called out. Thanks for coming. An older human woman stepped inside, carrying several large containers that smelled absolutely incredible. She had silver hair pulled back in a bun and the kind of face that looked like it smiled often. When she saw Castell, her eyes widened, but not with fear. With concern. Oh, you poor dear, Rita said, setting down her containers and approaching the dragon slowly. Tom told me you weren't feeling well. I brought soup. Chicken noodle for the humans, and I took a guess on something for you, sweetheart. She opened one of the larger containers, and the smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the shop. Castell's nostrils flared, and for the first time in days, Velshera saw something like appetite in her mother's eyes. Rita helped Castell eat, talking to her the whole time about nothing in particular. The weather on the station, the gossip from the market level, a funny story about her grandson. Just normal conversation, as if talking to a dragon was the most natural thing in the world. After Rita left, more humans started arriving. A young man named David showed up around 3 with a box of spare parts. Heard you were doing a full rebuild, he said to Tom. Figured you might need these. Don't worry about paying me back. I pulled them from a salvage job anyway. Then came a woman called Angela, who ran a clothing shop 2 levels up. She didn't bring parts or food. She brought music. A small speaker that she set up in the corner, playing something soft and instrumental. My husband always worked better with music, she explained to Velshera. He was a mechanic too. Passed 5 years ago, but he would have loved this project. Would have loved helping your mama. As the second day began, the shop had transformed into something between a workshop and a community center. Humans kept stopping by, bringing whatever they thought might help. Someone brought better lighting. Someone else brought a space heater when they noticed Castell shivering. A man named Walter, who looked about 100 years old, showed up with a crate of premium coolant. For when you test the new systems, he told Tom. Can't have her overheating. Velshera couldn't understand it. These humans didn't know her or her mother. They had no obligation to help. In the scaled Dominion, you helped your clutchmates, your blood relatives, and maybe your closest allies. But strangers? Never. Resources were limited, and weakness was something you hid, not something you shared. But here were these humans, giving freely. And it wasn't just giving things, either. They gave their time. Rita came back that evening with dinner. David returned to help Tom lift a particularly heavy component. Angela stayed for hours, just sitting with Castell, keeping her company while Tom and Velshera worked. On the second night, Tom finally let Velshera help with the actual repair work. He showed her how to calibrate the new servo motors he'd fabricated, explained the principles behind the power distribution system he was designing. He taught her patiently, never making her feel stupid when she didn't understand something the first time. The thing about human engineering, Tom said as they worked side by side, is that we design for adaptation. Most species, they build things to exact specifications. Perfect tolerances, no room for variation. But humans? We build things that can change, that can be modified, that can grow with the person using them. He held up a component that looked deceptively simple. This servo here? It's got learning algorithms built in. As your mom uses her wing, it'll adjust to her flying style, her preferences, her body's changes as she ages. It'll get better over time, not worse. Velshera turned the component over in her claws, marveling at the elegance of the design. Why don't other species do this? Tom shrugged. Because it's not efficient. It's not standardized. You can't mass-produce something like this and expect it to work perfectly for everyone. But that's the point. Your mom isn't everyone. She's an individual, and she deserves something built specifically for her. Around midnight on the second day, a group of 5 humans showed up together. They were all mechanics, friends of Tom from other parts of the station. They'd come to help with the final assembly, the part that required multiple sets of hands and perfect timing. You don't have to do this, Tom told them. A woman named Joyce laughed. You think we'd miss this? When's the last time any of us got to work on a dragon? This is the coolest project on the station. They worked through the night, this team of human mechanics, their hands moving in practice synchronization. They joked with each other, told stories, argued good-naturedly about the best way to route a particular cable. And through it all, they treated Castell with gentle respect, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, explaining what they were doing and why. As dawn broke on the third day, Tom stepped back from the workbench and wiped his hands on his rag. The new wing assembly gleamed under the shop lights, a masterpiece of human engineering. It looked nothing like the jury-rigged mess they'd removed. This was elegant, streamlined, beautiful. All right, Tom said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Let's get this installed and see if she can fly. The installation took another 6 hours. Tom and his team worked with the kind of careful precision that made Velshera hold her breath. Every connection had to be perfect. Every calibration had to be exact. One mistake could mean more pain for her mother, or worse, permanent damage that even Tom couldn't fix. Castell lay perfectly still throughout the procedure, trusting these humans in a way that shocked Velshera to her core. Dragons didn't trust easily. They especially didn't trust other species. But her mother's eyes stayed calm, focused on Tom's face as he worked, as if she could see something there that Velshera was only beginning to understand. When Tom finally connected the last neural interface, Castell's whole body went rigid. Velshera lunged forward, but Joyce caught her arm. Wait, Joyce said quietly. This is normal. The system is syncing with her nervous system. Give it a minute. That minute felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, Castell's body relaxed. Her eyes opened wide, and she made a sound that Velshera hadn't heard in years. A rumbling purr of contentment. How does it feel? Tom asked, kneeling beside the dragon's head. Castell's voice was weak, but clear. It feels like nothing. Tom's face showed concern. Nothing? That's not good. We should. No pain, Castell clarified, tears streaming down her scaled face. For the first time in 30 years, there's no pain. I can't feel the weight. I can't feel the grinding. It just feels like part of me. Tom's concerned expression melted into a smile. Yeah? Well, let's see if it works. But we need to do this right. Can you stand? With help from Velshera and 2 of the mechanics, Castell got to her feet. The new wing moved with her naturally, the servos so quiet they were almost silent. She extended it slowly, testing the range of motion, and Velshera watched in amazement as the wing responded perfectly to her mother's intentions. We need space, Tom said. The cargo bay should work. It's not ideal for a first flight, but it's the best we've got on the station. The journey to the cargo bay took 20 minutes. Word had somehow spread through the station, and by the time they arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Most of them were humans, but Velshera spotted a few other species in the mix. They all watched in silence as Tom led Castell to the center of the massive open space. The cargo bay was enormous, easily 200 meters across and 50 meters high. It was used for loading and unloading the largest shipments, and right now it was blessedly empty. The ceiling was transparent, showing the stars beyond, and Velshera felt her heart clench at the sight. Her mother hadn't flown among the stars in so long. Tom ran through a final systems check, his scanner showing all green readings. Everything looks perfect. But you take this slow, okay? We test hover first. If that feels good, you can try some basic movement. Don't push it. Castell nodded, her whole body trembling with anticipation. Velshera wanted to tell her to be careful, to not get her hopes up, to prepare for disappointment. But the words died in her throat. Her mother deserved this moment, whatever happened. Castell spread her wings. The good one and the new one extended in perfect symmetry, and even just standing there, she looked more whole than Velshera had seen her in decades. The albino scales caught the light from the stars above, making her mother look like she was carved from pearl and moonlight. Then Castell pushed off the ground. The movement was tentative at first, just a few inches of clearance. But the wing held. The servos responded. There was no grinding, no sparking, no screaming of tortured metal. Just the soft whisper of perfectly balanced machinery working exactly as it should. Castell rose higher. 1 meter. 2 meters. 3. She hovered there, her wings beating in a steady rhythm that looked effortless. And then she laughed. It was a sound Velshera had forgotten, a deep, joyous rumble that echoed through the cargo bay. It works, Castell breathed. It actually works. She began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. A circle around the cargo bay. Then a figure 8. Then a spiral that took her up toward the transparent ceiling. Every movement was smooth, controlled, natural. The wing adapted to her intentions instantly, the human-designed learning algorithms already beginning to understand her unique flying style. The crowd below erupted in cheers. Humans shouted and whistled, and even some of the other species joined in. But Velshera couldn't make a sound. She just watched her mother fly, really fly, for the first time in her memory. Tom stood beside her, his own eyes wet with tears. "She's beautiful up there," he said softly. After what felt like both hours and seconds, Castell descended. She landed with a grace that made it look easy, folding her wings with a satisfied sigh. The moment her feet touched the ground, Velshera rushed forward and threw her arms around her mother's neck. "You flew?" Velshera sobbed into her mother's scales. "You really flew." "I did," Castell agreed, her own voice thick with emotion. She looked over Velshera's head at Tom. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay this." But Tom was already shaking his head. He walked over to Velshera and pressed something into her claws. It was a toolkit, compact but comprehensive, with specialized tools sized for draconic hands. "Maintenance kit," he explained. "Everything you need to keep the wing in perfect condition. I've also loaded up a data chip with full instructions, written in draconic. Basic maintenance, troubleshooting, everything." "But the payment," Velshera started. "We still owe you." Tom held up a hand. $350 for parts, remember? Everything else was just neighbors helping neighbors. Velshera wanted to argue, but Tom pulled out another data chip. "This is more important anyway. It's got contact information for human mechanics in every sector of this part of the galaxy. Friends of mine, people I trust. If something goes wrong, if you need adjustments, if you just have questions, you reach out to any of them. Just mention my name. They'll take care of you, and they'll charge you fair prices. No more getting ripped off by mechanics who don't care." He looked at Castell directly. "You shouldn't have to spend another 3 decades in pain because you can't find someone decent to help you. Everyone deserves to fly, and everyone deserves to have people they can trust to keep them flying." Rita pushed through the crowd with a bag full of food containers. "For your journey," she said, handing it to Velshera. "And you come back and visit, you hear? We want updates on how she's doing." David offered a spare parts kit. Angela gave them a new speaker with a collection of human music. Walter pressed a credit chip into Velshera's hand. "For fuel and docking fees," he said gruffly. "Can't have you two stranded somewhere." One by one, the humans who had helped over the past 3 days came forward with gifts, with well wishes, with contact information and offers of friendship. These strangers who owed them nothing gave them everything. Velshera looked at her mother, saw the wonder in Castell's golden eyes, and finally understood what made humans special. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't their adaptability or their creativity, though those things mattered. It was this instinct to care for those who were hurting, to build community instead of hierarchy, to measure worth not in strength but in compassion. Tom walked them back to their ship, chatting easily about maintenance schedules and recommended flight patterns for breaking in the new wing. At the docking port, he gave Castell one final check, nodded in satisfaction, and stepped back. "You take care of yourself," he told the dragon. "And you remember, there are people out here who care. You're not alone anymore." As their ship pulled away from Frontier Station 7, Velshera watched Tom's figure grow smaller through the viewport. He stood there waving until they jumped to faster than light, a human mechanic who had changed everything. 6 months changed everything. Velshera stood in Tom's workshop, now wearing a mechanic's apron stained with oil and coolant, her claws more comfortable holding a wrench than they'd ever been holding a weapon. The shop looked different now. Tom had expanded into the space next door, knocking down a wall to create room for the 3 additional workbenches they'd needed. The sign outside no longer flickered. It read Tom's Repairs and Cybernetic Services, in 6 different languages. The door chimed, and an elderly Corinthian shuffled in, his cybernetic leg making a grinding sound that made Velshera wince in sympathy. Behind him came his daughter, her face tight with worry. "Are you the humans who helped the dragon?" the daughter asked, her translator struggling with the emotion in her voice. Tom looked up from the engine he was rebuilding and wiped his hands. "We helped Castell, yeah. What can we do for you?" The old Corinthian's leg gave out, and Velshera caught him before he hit the ground. Up close, she could see the poor craftsmanship, the cheap materials, the same disregard for the person attached to the machinery that she'd seen in her mother's wing. "The clinic on level 6 said they can't help him," the daughter explained. "The parts are too old," they said. "Not worth their time. But someone told us that humans don't turn people away." Tom was already pulling up his scanner. "Let's take a look. Vel, can you get our friend settled on the bench? And make some of that tea your mom likes. I think we're going to be here a while." That had become the pattern. Word spread through the station like wildfire. The humans who had fixed the impossible dragon, who had done it for almost nothing, who treated people like they mattered. Beings who had been turned away by every reputable clinic on the station started showing up at Tom's door. And Tom never turned anyone away. Rita's nephew, a young man named Kyle, had quit his job at a restaurant to work with them full-time. He had a talent for fabrication, for taking Tom's designs and turning them into reality. Joyce came by 3 days a week, teaching Velshera the advanced techniques that Tom didn't have time to cover. David had started a parts collective, where humans donated or sold spare components at cost to keep the workshop running. But the real change wasn't just the workshop. It was what happened after. Castell had become something of a legend on Frontier Station 7. Every morning, she flew patrol routes around the station's exterior, her albino scales visible from every viewport. She didn't work for station security, didn't get paid for it. She just did it because she could fly again, and because flying made people feel safe. Kids would press their faces against windows to watch her pass. Shop owners would wave. Even the usually stoic Talgren merchants had started nodding respectfully when they saw her. And where Castell flew, things changed. Crime dropped by 40% in the first 3 months. Not because of enforcement, but because people felt like they mattered. When you saw a dragon who had been broken and forgotten, now flying free because humans had cared enough to help, it changed something in you. Made you think about your own neighbors differently. Made you more likely to help instead of ignore. The Galactic Council noticed. They'd sent an inspector last month, a stern Volian administrator who wanted to understand why Frontier Station 7 was suddenly outperforming stations twice its size in every quality of life metric. The inspector had spent 3 days interviewing residents, reviewing data, and looking increasingly confused. Velshera had been there when the inspector interviewed Tom. She remembered the conversation clearly. "I don't understand," the inspector had said, her mandibles clicking in frustration. "The economic models say this shouldn't work. You're providing services below cost. You're spending time on individuals who provide no return on investment. By every logical measure, your workshop should have failed within a month." Tom had just smiled. "Maybe you're measuring the wrong things. What else is there to measure besides efficiency and profit? How about whether people are happy? Whether they feel safe? Whether they know someone gives a damn about them?" The inspector had left without really understanding, but her report must have said something positive because 2 weeks later, the council had sent a grant. 50,000 credits to expand the workshop and hire more staff. Tom had laughed when he saw it. "They still don't get it," he told Velshera. "They think throwing money at the problem is the solution. But money's not what was missing. Care was what was missing." Now, as Velshera helped the old Corinthian onto the workbench and started her examination, she understood exactly what Tom meant. The daughter was crying quietly, probably because this was the first time in months someone had treated her father like a person instead of an inconvenience. The door chimed again. A Harati woman with a malfunctioning arm prosthetic. Then a young Talgrin whose hearing implant was failing. Then a human from the upper levels whose daughter needed a custom mobility device. They kept coming, a steady stream of people who had been ignored by a galaxy that only valued those who could keep up. Tom looked at the growing line and grinned. Vel, call your mom. We're going to need her help coordinating all this. Castell arrived 20 minutes later, landing gracefully outside and folding her wings before ducking through the enlarged entrance they'd installed for her. She'd taken to wearing a communications headset, looking both ridiculous and magnificent at the same time. All right everyone, Castell announced in her deep, resonant voice. I know you're all worried, but you're in good hands here. We're going to help each of you, but we need to do this organized. Who's been waiting longest? She moved through the crowd with a calm authority, taking names, assessing urgency, offering reassurance. The dragon who had once been discarded, who had suffered in silence for decades, now stood as living proof that things could get better. That help was possible. That someone cared. By evening, they'd seen 12 patients. Tom's hands were cramping, and Velshera's eyes burned with fatigue, but they kept working. Kyle was fabricating parts in the back. Joyce had shown up after her shift to help with a complicated neural interface. Rita brought dinner for everyone, including the patients still waiting. Around midnight, the last patient left, a small child holding her parent's hand, her new sensory implant allowing her to hear her parent's voice for the first time. The look on both their faces was worth every hour of work. Tom collapsed into his chair and looked around the workshop. You know what the crazy thing is? 6 months ago, this was just a shop. I fixed engines, patched up ships, kept my head down. Now look at us. You changed everything, Velshera said quietly. But Tom shook his head. No. We all changed it together. Your mom, you, every human who showed up with soup or spare parts or just their time. That Corinthian we helped today? Is going to tell his friends. And they'll tell their friends. And slowly, bit by bit, people will remember that we're all supposed to take care of each other. Castell settled down near the workbenches, her presence filling the space with warmth. The Scaled Dominion would call this weakness, she said thoughtfully. Helping those who can't help themselves. Spending resources on those who offer nothing in return. What do you call it? Tom asked. Castell looked at her daughter, at Tom, at the workshop that had become a second home. I call it civilization. Real civilization. Not ships and technology and expansion. But actually caring whether your neighbor is okay. A notification pinged on Tom's datapad. Another message from a human mechanic in a distant sector, asking for advice on a case. That happened daily now. The network Tom had built was spreading, human mechanics sharing techniques and supporting each other, creating a web of care that stretched across star systems. Velshera walked to the window and looked out at the station. Lights glowed in windows, ships came and went, life continued in all its messy complexity. But it was different now. Better. Because somewhere in all that vastness, people remembered that they mattered. That someone would help if they needed it. Everyone deserves to fly, Velshera said softly, repeating Tom's words from months ago. Tom joined her at the window, watching Castell's reflection in the glass. Yeah, he agreed. Everyone deserves to fly. And sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to build them wings.